What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop live stream for the RSM Classic. Going to get you guys ready for all your exposure this week with a last second look at the weather report and how that'll impact rounds 1 and 2. We'll talk the GPP ownership, how to impact the game theory edge over the next few days. Any questions that you've got in the live chat, also any player deep dives that you have for me as well. And on the underdog and the prize pick side, some stat averages from last year's events and some pieces of exposure for round number 1. That'll include a couple underdog and prize picks props I've entered, also a few matchups on Hard Rock bets. By the end, you'll have all the info you need to hopefully have ourselves a week. But we got Rushing Yard in the chat. Welcome on in, everyone. Whether you're watching this live or on replay, smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and let's get rocking and rolling for this week. First thing to note would be the golf course, which is a golf course rotation for rounds 1 and 2. We have the Seaside course and the Plantation course. So if you haven't caught any content this week, the Seaside course is the main venue out of the 2 and the one that they're playing for 3 of the 4 rounds. So the Plantation course is going to be the one that's in play for 1 of the first 2 rounds. It is a par 72 setup. So historically, when conditions get a little bit tougher, the Plantation course plays a bit easier than what we have at the Seaside course because there's more par 5s, some shorter par 4s that you can attack as well. But when we don't have windy conditions, they end up playing a lot closer. So we'll expand on that in a bit when we get to the showdown aspect. But the golf courses are short, easy, more positional off the tee. I have a lot of content already up on my YouTube explaining exactly how it's going to play, but it's about your short to mid irons. It's about Bermuda grass putting, and you have to have some around the green as well. It's maybe not as easy of a golf course or golf course is what we've had over the last month or so. Let's talk about this weather. So rather than tee time waves over the first couple rounds, we have 2 golf courses in play. And like I was saying before, the Plantation course is a little bit more protected from the wind than what we have with the Seaside course. So if there's going to be a windy day for round 1 or 2, we want our guys playing on Plantation then. But when we take a look at the forecast for rounds 1 and 2 here, you're going to see that it looks extremely calm. So first off, on Thursday, it looks like we're getting sub 5 to 7 miles an hour winds the entire round. So there's not going to be an edge for playing on Plantation or Seaside tomorrow. I would say the birdie average will likely be a little bit higher on the Plantation course just because of some of the potentially drivable par 4s that you have there. It's also a slightly more wide open course off the tee, so that's why people will take driver a little bit more often over there. But with the conditions, at least with the receptiveness of the greens, the wind, of course, is all going to be very similar from track to track. And then we're going to go to the GFS model for Friday because it is fully loaded in at this point. And it's going to be calling for a lot of the same, about at most 7 miles an hour of wind, a 3 mile an hour differential from morning to afternoon. And whether you're playing the Seaside course on Thursday or Friday, it's looking like conditions are going to be similar. So at least from the tee time stacking standpoint, I don't see anything that's obvious ahead of times. But anytime we have a coastal golf course like this, I always play some weather lineups just in case. And it's the same thing we did at Bermuda. I went with 5% in either direction, full on stacking with the tee time waves. I'm going to be doing that for this week as well. 5% in either direction with 6-0 guys starting on the Seaside course. And then I'm going to have 5% going with full 6-0 on the Plantation course. So that's personally how I'm treating this week. If you want to go more extreme with the stacking, you can. I just don't see the reason for it. The weather looks completely calm for almost the entire weekend. It looks like Sunday, the wind's going to start to kick up a little bit into that 10 to 15 mile an hour range, but we're used to much more severe weather than what we have here. In fact, there's been years, I've been there for the last 5 years, where there's been rain, there's been cold temperatures into the 40s. There's been rain, wind, and cold like we had 3 years ago when Adam Svensson ended up winning. This is going to be much easier scoring. So the year that O'Bear won, we had minus 29 win. I think it's going to be closer to minus 20 to minus 22 this year. So not quite as easy as when O'Bear went nuclear low around this kind of a track, but still a lot lower scoring than what we're used to seeing. But at least for the tee time stacking and for main slate purposes, I don't see a massive edge for the first few days. Now let's talk about Showdown. And I'm not going to play round 1 Showdown. I never do for this golf tournament just because I want to see the averages in the setup. The thing about round 2 Showdown, that's the absolute nuts here, is that the pin locations don't change. So for props and for the DFS and Showdown side of things, we know exactly how the golf course is going to play. So for round 2 Showdown, it's probably the biggest weather edge and biggest wave edge that we're going to have the entire year. But because of the calm conditions that we see in the forecast, don't be surprised if the Seaside course plays about -2 to -2.5 and the Plantation course plays like -2.5 to -3, it could be like a half a stroke difference towards the Plantation course. That's historically what we've seen between the two tracks, usually about a half a stroke to maybe even up to a stroke difference between the two, depending on the weather that they're playing in. But there have been a few slates, and a lot of people would call them outliers, but maybe it's just how the golf course plays when it's completely calm, where the Seaside course actually plays easier than what we have at the Plantation course. And doing some deep diving into that, it's been when we have the easiest conditions. When it plays as calm as it possibly can, that's actually when the Seaside course ends up playing easier. So do not be completely mind blown if after round number 1, the Seaside course is actually the lower scored a par out of the two. Being a par 70, the lower raw scores are, of course, going to come from the Seaside side. But because of the par 72 setup, that gives players more birdie opportunities at the Plantation side. So if scoring's the same across the two, I still want slightly more Plantation players because they're going to have more of those birdie opportunities. But if the Seaside course plays easier and they're going to be lower owned for round 1 showdown because people think that the Plantation course is always going to be the easier of the two golf courses, then there might be a little bit of an edge to attack there. So I'm personally not going to be playing for round 1 showdown. All I would say is that I would want golfers from both sides if I was playing round 1 showdown. And if I wanted to be bold about it, this is by no certainty going to work out for you if you go this direction, but I might just go all in on the guys playing on the Seaside course. I might play against that, what the rest of the field's doing, take that contrarian stance, because if you get the lower owned options and they're the nutted side of the draw, that could be a heck of a showdown slate for you. But let's go through some ownership next. After we go through weather, talk about the golf courses at hand, it's always important to know where the field is coming in because we can break down players, we can handicap it all we want, but a lot of times ownership's the main thing for DFS. We've got to play against 50 to 100,000 entries in the largest field contest, and ignoring what the rest of the field is doing would be absolutely silly. So I've got the top 10 highest owned players on here, and we're going to go through them one by one and give you an idea of who some of those players getting the steam are. We got Brandon in the chat, says, legendary Luke, it's go time. Welcome on in, buddy. We got Jay, the football nerd, down there as well, says, thank you as always, brother. Thank you for always showing support. Welcome on in, man. He said, can we deep dive Brandon Valdez? So yeah, young guy from the PGA Tour U, finished in the top 2 this year in that. A lot of really high pedigree players coming from that. He's just somebody that's an extremely talented player. So if you want to be early to that talent like I am, then obviously you can tail that. But he's one of those guys, kind of like a Luke Clanton that came out, an absolute stud on that circuit, that's going to find a lot of success out here on tour. Now, is it going to happen immediately for all those guys? Probably not. Kind of like a Quaven, it'll be inconsistent. They'll have some missed cuts. They'll have some downer performances. But then, like you saw with Quaven, he'll nearly win in back-to-back weeks too. So very talented kid, and I'm excited to see him out here on the PGA Tour a little bit more often. He said, Benny Ann is one of your favorite golfers. Is his putter going to hold him back here? He said he assumes his ownership's going to be low. So yeah, I wouldn't say that he's a diamond in the rough, one of the lowest owned guys in that range, but he's average to slightly below average ownership. So you would be correct about that, Ryan. And the putter is a big deal around this course. It's my number 2 key stat this week. So having Bermuda grass putting in particular is extremely useful, but it's not the end all be all. If you're somebody like Benny Ann that's more of a ball striking first player, you gain 3 to 4 strokes to the field there, and then he's a neutral with that flat stick. That could be a top 20 finish right there. So to win, he's going to have to flip the putter. He's going to have to find some magic there, but you don't necessarily need him to win in every market, whether that's DFS, maybe a top 20 bet, that sort of thing. I would just maybe not the highest upside player that we have in this golf tournament, but a pretty safe ball striker, especially in this kind of field. He said, thoughts on the under on strokes? We're going to do some prop stuff later, Jose, so I'm going to skip your question for now, but we'll come back to that when we go through prop stuff later. He said the Auburn kids are elite. Yeah, man, he's a stud. There's a few other guys on that team that I think are also probably going to play out here on tour at some point. I mean, all those college kids, whether it's the Auburn guys, Florida State's got a few studs out there. It's mighty fine, impressive. Can we deep dive Cole for sure? So we can go through some of the shots gained metrics. And by the way, Jay, the football nerd, I would go through shots gained metrics on Valdez, but we don't have them quite yet. He's only played a couple times out here, so there's just not enough stats to look at those reliably. But we will do that with Eric Cole. So Eric Cole's been struggling off the tee, and some of this recent sample size stuff can be thrown off because some of the events this fall where we didn't have shots gained metrics, but it's still on brand for an Eric Cole, losing about 0.8 strokes per round off the tee, gaining on approach approach and then gaining with the putter, he's always going to be a solid iron player. He can be a bit streaky with the putter, but on Bermuda grass, also past Palm, which he's very familiar on, he's going to gain in most golf tournaments. So yeah, I like the course fit here. He makes sense for these shorter tracks where it's not super off the tee heavy. $7,600 is relatively cheap in this field as well. Really no complaints from me. There's somebody at that same price tag that I personally prefer over an Eric Cole, but Eric Cole's got to rate out as like a 7 out of 10. Unfortunately, not every 7 out of 10 makes my player pool, but I think he's one of the better options in that range for sure, Kim. Let's talk through the ownership at the top. So ownership at the top is mostly congested on your 9-10K players, as we always see for main slate, but it's also condensing on some of the more popular pieces of content, right? You see a lot of people talking up the same players this week. I was hoping that English, Brian Harman, and some of these studs that haven't played lately wouldn't get all that ownership, and well, I didn't get my wish. Harris English is the highest owned player in my projections for this week. Part of that has to do with him being the most expensive player, because there's not a 12K guy that's eating up all that salary up there. People are going to have almost all the salary they want to spend. So guys like Harris English are almost just getting ownership by default there. But a Brian Harman too, I was kind of hoping that he'd be 15 to 20%. He's number 2 in ownership for the field at 22.5%. That doesn't make these guys unplayable. There's a reason why I bet them to win, and they're still core plays for me for this sort of event. It's just that you have to keep that in mind when you're playing them. If you've got 1, 2, or especially if you have 3 of these players in a lineup together of this top 10, then your last 3 spots are going to have a ton of differentiation in them, or at least they have to have a bunch of differentiation if you want to make sure you're not duplicating yourself with a whole bunch of other lineups, and also to make sure you have enough leverage to move up in those GPPs. So, I don't love seeing that ownership on guys like an English or Harman, but it's not a death sentence. And at least my take on navigating the chalk at the top end of the board is if they were players that you bet outright, that you were on a Monday when you went through the pricing and you went through your course fit, you were like, wow, like these are the guys that I want to have in a lot of lineups. If that's the case and they end up being chalky, then so be it. But if you get to Wednesday, like what we have right now, and you're trying to round out your player pool in the 9-10K range, and you see a 20 to 25% ownership number on a player, then you should probably think twice about that, because in order to get 2x leverage on somebody that's 20 to 25% owned, you've got to play them in 40% plus lineups. And to use somebody in 40%, especially a 150 maxer like myself, to use it in nearly half of my portfolio, you've got to love that sort of a play. And I'm okay with doing that with the 9-10K players that you absolutely love. But when I'm not okay with doing it are guys that are sketchy, guys that I'm just kind of like, oh, I kind of like that guy this week. And especially 7 and 6K range players. When you get towards the bottom end of the board, I don't care how good of a player they are. Maybe if it's like Scotty Scheffler and they have him in the 7K range, like you could argue that he'd be a good piece of chalk down there. But there's a very small list of players that could be mispriced by that much. Most of the time, that 6-7K chalk is the most egregious that we have because they're lower tier players and they're priced down there for a reason. Draftkings pricing isn't like NBA pricing where it's somewhat subjective and they get it wrong all the time. MMA pricing, like they'll change a fighter, right? And someone will go from an underdog to a favorite, and like that fucks up the ownership at the pricing algorithm. That doesn't happen with golf. They just base it based on the actual outright betting odds. I mean, we'll see somebody drift from like 75 to 1, like a Novak this week, to like 50 to 1 and whatnot. But you're not going to see somebody that should be a 9-10K golfer be priced in the 7K range. It just literally does not happen in golf. So there's a lot of times there'll be guys that are 7 to 10% owned in that 6-7K range that have no business of being that highly owned. So where I personally am a little bit more stringent about the ownership and where I make sure not to play a lot of that chalk is when we get past this 9 and 10K range. So it's not that you can ignore this ownership up here, but it does mean a little bit less with some of these top tier players. Rinko Hoey, Michael Thorbjornsson, they're expensive and they come in with a lot of form. So both of those players are getting played for that reason. Siwoo Kim, I've got a little bit over 21% himself. Denny McCarthy, one of my outrights this week. Same thing with a Chris Kirk, a rate about 20% ownership apiece. So these guys that are 20% owned, probably limit them to at most about 3 of these players in a lineup together. I don't think you could fit 4 of these in a lineup together just because they're all a bit too expensive to go ahead and make that work. But for round 4 showdown, when we're going to have some 6, 7K guys that are 20% owned because of the placement points going on, you don't want 4, and especially don't want 5 of those players in the same lineup together. You just don't have enough room to get different to the field to make sure you're not going to duplicate yourself and to move up in this large field contest. And the last 3 players we have on there be a Thorbjorn Olesen, a JT Poston, and a Pearson Coody. JT Poston, another player that I was hoping would be a little bit lower owned, but it seems like the field is wisely getting him into lineups, as I think he's one of the best players and one of the better course fits that we have at this sort of a golf course. So that's the ownership in the top 10. Just outside of this top 10, we have a few 7K players that are peaking themselves and getting close to that top 10 of the ownership. But you can see in terms of the actual top 10, it's all 8, 9, and 10K range players. So to download this sheet with all my projections, also my entire player poll for this week, also everything that we're doing for rounds 2 through 4 showdown, make sure to check out my Patreon page for all of that. Golf DFS tier is how you get access to this spreadsheet, everything completely uncensored that is blacked out. And that's $15 a month. So link in the description of the video to go out there and check it out. Make sure to do it if you guys haven't already. And next up, let's go through some prop stuff. So on the prop side of things, I'm really liking what I'm seeing for round 1 because I don't think they've priced it nearly optimistically enough. So let's go through the 2 golf courses because we have props for both sides of things. You got the Seaside course, the main course. That's the par 70. It played slightly under par last year. That got really thrown off by one round that played way over par. So I think the scoring average last year and some of these averages can be a little bit misleading, but historically under really calm conditions, and that's the kind of lens that we're going to look through this, just because it is going to be extremely calm and nearly ideal for tomorrow. It plays between -2 to -3. In fact, there are years where it played like -3.5 under par when we had perfect conditions at the Seaside course. Birdie average was closer to 4.5 for a round like that. A lot of times it's in that 4 to 4.3 range at the Seaside course. And the bogey average, a lot of times is closer to 2.25 per round. So it's in that 0.25 range. And also the fairway average and the green and regulation averages that you see just below that are also usually a little bit higher than what we saw for last year. So just keep in mind that the last year's average is thrown off by some outliers. And same thing with the Plantation course. It only played -1.2. Historically, it plays closer to -2.5 for most years. So even easier. In fact, might even play -3 sometimes when it plays on completely calm conditions. Birdie average in the 4.5 to even 4.75 range, and bogey or worse average in the 1.75 to 2 range. So you can see these averages are going to be slightly throwing people off. And I think because of the averages that we have from last year, the Prize Picks board and underdog boards are a little bit higher than they should be, because let's go to a few props I've already entered. So they've got this Novak under, also this Thigala under on the PGA Tour side, and they're both playing the Seaside course. So that's the course that played about a 70 last year. I told you guys, this is probably going to play about -2 tomorrow. I think maybe even the whole way down to -2.5. Guys like Novak, by the way, made the Tour Championship last year. Sahith Theegala has won on tour before. He's also finished at 2nd at this golf course in the past, and he's made 3 straight cuts. He's gained strokes to the field in 5 straight events on the PGA Tour. I know Sahith Theegala is a lot more inconsistent these days, and he's been dealing with a lot of injury stuff in 2025. But the fact that he's been able to gain strokes to the field in 5 straight is, I think, extremely impressive. And you're talking about somebody who was formerly a top 25 player of the world. Even if he's just an average player, if it's a -2 to a -2.5 scoring average, I like his chances to go under with the absolutely nutted conditions. And on the flip side, Andrew Novak making the Tour Championship, I think that kind of speaks for itself. He was one of the top 30 players that we had on all the PGA Tour schedule, and we get push equity at -2, which could be even worse than what the field average is. And this isn't a regular PGA Tour event. We've got to realize that too. This is a fall series event with a much weaker field than average. These guys like Novak, who for the season are gaining strokes on average, same thing with Sahith. Even despite him not having the best results, he's been a lot better than I think most people would realize. If they're even just an average player in a well below average field strength here, they're going to push this, if not go under. So that's why I liked both of those. That's a 2.75x payout on those two together. But there's a lot of other props that I was mixing into, and those are on my Patreon page. If you guys want to see some of the other props that I've entered for round 1, I believe none of them have bumped either, because the sports books, the lines they have on here are straight in line with what you have on the sports books. Like, for example, Vince Whaley's at 67.5 on the books, and he's juiced towards the over. So that's why he's at 68 strokes over here. I don't think the sports books have it priced correctly either. I think they should probably have it at least a half a stroke to maybe an entire stroke lower based on some of the averages that we've seen at this course. So that's my take on the prop side. I think a lot of positive stance plays that make sense. And then a couple of matchups that I entered for this weekend. First off is going to be this Bud Colley for round number 1 versus Max McGreevy, and he's minus 105 versus McGreevy. And I looked at the last 6 months sample size for both of those players. 6 months gives us a very wide range, and it gives us a player's baseline for the last half year. Colley was gaining about 0.51 shots gained per round, about a half a stroke per round, which is pretty good. It's not elite level stuff, but it's much better than average in this kind of field. Whereas Max McGreevy, though he was better than average over that stretch, he was only gaining 0.17 shots gained per round over the last 6 months. So that's a 0.34 shot difference between those two players. And what you've got to realize with Colley is that he had some impressive performances at the Players Championship, major champs, also some signature field events towards the end of the season. Whereas Max McGreevy, I mean, where the hell did he show up this year, right? And Max McGreevy, believe it or not, at least on Hard Rock Bet, is the favorite in this sort of a matchup. So yeah, minus 105, I'll take that all day. I think that's just disrespectful to Bud Colley. He's the much better player out of those two. And then on the other one, it's a full tournament matchup that I'm taking between Michael Brennan and Seamus Power. And we did the same thing last week, and I'm going right back to it this time around. Michael Brennan is, at least for my money and what I've seen so far, top 25 player on tour right now. Maybe even better than that. I mean, he's made every cut so far. He's had multiple top 20 finishes, top 15 finish last week, won his first ever start out here this year. Seamus Power, on the other hand, is a old, crusty veteran. I know that he's had a lot of success at this course in the past. He tears up these shorter, more positional golf courses, but it's an aging, over-the-hill Seamus Power versus young potential superstar. I don't care if it's the perfect course fit, like it is for Seamus Power, versus one that's not a great course fit because Michael Brennan is an extremely driver-heavy player. I don't give a rat's ass. One guy could be like a Scott, I don't want to say Scotty Scheffler level player. One could be like a Xander Schauffele level player, and Michael Brennan, and one is like 40 years old. He's hardly keeping his tour status at this point. Again, not to talk too much smack on Power because he's made me a lot of money over the years playing him in DFS and for props, but like there are levels to this game, and Michael Brennan is far, far ahead of Seamus Power. In fact, Michael Brennan might be far ahead of everyone else in this field when it comes to talent level. Like, it's a terrible course fit. I'm still using him in DFS this week. He's one of my bigger stands, one of the more exposed plays that I have of the week, because you can't teach winning. You can't teach being a stud like he's shown us so far this year. So yeah, give me him at minus 115. It's not quite even money, but pretty close to it. And same thing on that Bud Colley lean. But for the rest of the props, the rest of the exposure that I'm taking for round number 1 and for the rest of the event, guys, you guys can find that over on my Patreon page. That's all I've got for this live stream. I'm going to go over any last second questions that we've got in the chat. But best of luck with everything that you guys are going with. If you haven't already smashed that like button, go ahead and do so. If you haven't already, also subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. Rounds 2 through 4, we're going to be doing a similar live stream for Showdown and for props, going over the stat averages for PGA after every single round, weather report for Friday through Sunday, and how to attack the Showdown boards as well. So make sure to stop on by for that. If you subscribe, you'll get notified when all those go live. And of course, for all of 2026 to come up, because this is our last main slate of 2025. We might have some stuff for the Hero. We'll see if we get some good DFS contests for that. But it's not going to be a full week like what we have here, right? We got 156 players, a full cut line shot length to work with as well. So let's enjoy it, right? They're at least giving us a good one to end the season. So let's go out there and end it with the bang. Best of luck. If I don't see you guys for the round 2 through 4 live streams, if you're just somebody that does the main slate stuff, I hope to see you guys at the top end of those leaderboards. Check out the Patreon page for all the extra content that I'm doing. And if you have any last second questions, throw them in the chat right now, because we're going to end off with those. She said, how firm are the greens playing? I'm not there, so I can't give you a take on that, Kim, but they've had some rain this month. It hasn't been like a drought conditions or anything, but it also hasn't been super rainy out there. So average firmness is what I'm assuming that they're playing with. And until we're here otherwise, that's probably the case. What's going on, Phil? He said, you're stacking AM wave. There's not really any waves. So you mean the golf course, right? Okay. Best of luck out there with that. He said, any chance for bad weather Friday? I mean, there's always a chance, right? Meteorologists get things wrong, but when we take a look at the forecast, Phil, it doesn't look like there's going to be bad weather Friday. So if we go over here to Friday, we look at the GFS, it looks extremely flat. ECM model, there's some wind, but it's towards like 3 to 4 p.m. So it's like the last hour of play maybe gets hit on that model. But if we go through some of the other ones on here, Icon's completely flat. Medio Blue is as flat can be. And then NEM is also the same way. You can play it. That's what I'm doing. So you might want to go back to the weather section because I expand on this a little bit more, Phil. But I'm playing both waves 5% just in case. 90% of my lineups going to be played straight up without any of that sort of bias. But if you want to do it just in case, then I couldn't give you too much pushback on that. But that's all I've got, guys. I appreciate you. As I was saying before, best of luck. And I'll see you guys for the round 2 live stream tomorrow night.